Growing up in the northeastern United States, I can attest that there are many birds which are very common to see now. So turkeys are easy to find where I live, often in my front yard. But for most of my life, just turkeys in the wild was not something that you saw. Pileated woodpeckers, very easy to find. But I went, almost 2 decades of my life without seeing a pileated in the wild. When I was younger, there was not a single bald eagle that could be seen, certainly not nesting east of the Mississippi River. And now when I kayak on the Delaware River, usually within a mile or a mile and a half, you'll see one. And so when we talk about human effects on wildlife populations, humans can certainly take measures to bring wildlife back and to protect them. And certainly in this area here, whether it be turkeys or pileated woodpeckers or bald eagles, it's very easy to see that has happened. Now, that's important because as the human population grows and grows, obviously this means that habitat for wildlife is much less than it was, and it's continuing to decrease. In other videos, I talk about other organisms. In this video, I'm going to talk about raptors and other non-passerine birds, such as the turkeys and woodpeckers, etc. So raptors are one of many groups of birds. So birds are quite numerous. They have more species than reptiles, amphibians, and mammals combined. And they can be split into groups like these raptors, which are adapted to prey on other organisms with pointed beaks and talons, etc. And then we can split the raptors, which form an order, into a number of families. And there are now separate families, which would include falcons, turkeys, turkey vultures and other vultures like the black vulture, and then even condors. Condors are the largest flying birds in the world, but they became extinct in the wild because of loss of habitat and other factors. It includes the osprey, and so like all groups, we have a series of biological categories, and there can be groups within groups. As we look at these, many of them are found only in parts of the world. So that secretary bird is a relative of hawks and eagles with its long legs, but not found in our area. And so it's important to think globally because many of these species in other parts of the world are in danger of extinction, but it is easiest to act locally. So I wanted to address both. So just mention that we can certainly take measures to affect endangered species in our area, like the bald eagle, which is a raptor, but still at the same time be concerned about the raptors in other parts of the world. So just to make that point once again, I lived in Paraguay while I was in the Peace Corps, and the raptors that one would find in Paraguay are different from the raptors which one finds in North America. If after I talk about raptors, I'm going to go into other groups of birds which are not the songbirds. They're called the non-passerine birds. There would certainly be birds which we don't have in our area. So, more tropical regions have a host of parrots and parakeets. There was a Carolina parakeet which lived in the northeastern United States, but it was hunted to extinction. And so when one considers biodiversity in other parts of the world, sometimes there are entire groups of birds which we don't have. So Northeast United States does not have toucans. It does not have, and there are different kinds of toucans. It does not have parrots. But then there are groups that we do have. We do have kingfishers, although there might be different kinds of kingfishers in other parts of the world. We have woodpeckers, although in other parts of the world there may be different woodpeckers than what we have here. And so biodiversity is something that we should discuss so that we can protect our local wildlife, and that will be the focus here. But this then ties into global issues as well. Biodiversity is under threat everywhere, and so all global citizens, have the opportunity and a responsibility to take care of the local wildlife. And so a previous video had gone through aquatic birds. The next video in the series will go through the songbirds. But I would like now to go through all of the groups in the middle, the raptors, woodpeckers, and what are sometimes just grouped together as the non-passerine land birds. So raptors, once again, are adapted for a predatory lifestyle. And as such, they are very important. They help to control rodent populations, but they can feed on a diversity of prey, from amphibians and reptiles. There are raptors which specialize in fish. Small raptors can eat a large number of insects. Certainly there are very notable animals, obviously the bald eagle being the symbol of the United States, and the fact that it was almost completely wiped out, at least in the eastern half of the country, because of pesticide use, and that conservation has then brought it back so that it's now very healthy in the eastern United States, is both a lesson in how we can negatively impact the environment, and then how we can positively impact the environment as well. Now, once again, one of the things I try to impress upon my students is when I was their age, I would have loved to have seen a bald eagle. It was just impossible. There were zero east of the Mississippi River. And now where I teach in certain times of year, like in spring, students are 20 minutes away from a bald eagle nest that's reliable. And so the Bashakill, the Hudson, the Delaware, many places are reliable places to see bald eagles. The fact that I've seen it, just drive. I've seen bald eagles just driving. I've seen one fly overhead while washing my dishes, looking out the window. This is amazing that something which was impossible to see is now so very common. Now, there are many kinds of raptor. One which is kind of belonging in its own group. So genetically and anatomically, it's different from the others. It's a fishing eagle known as the osprey. Because of its white, it can sometimes be confused for bald eagles. But obviously the white, on the chest is something that is different from bald eagles. Because it specializes in fish, it has a number of adaptations, such as an incredibly fast reflex as it brings its talons together so that it can catch slippery fish. Ospreys had also been negatively impacted by pesticide use, which then increased in food chains. So if pesticides are released into waterways, the aquatic invertebrates get some, but then the little fish that eat those aquatic invertebrates, it accumulates in their body. The big fish get even more. And then the individuals which are most at risk would be at the tops of food chains, whether it be a human who eats a lot of fish, or animals which are the tops of food chains, like ospreys and bald eagles and other animals. So that is one of the raptors in our area. You can kind of see their ospreys, when they fly, they kind of have a bend at the elbow of their wing. Actually more of a wrist. And that's one of the ways that one can distinguish between those versus an eagle, which would have a longer wingspan, and the wings would be straight. So bald eagles look the same, male and female, unlike many birds where males have a different coloration than females. This typical pattern of having a white head and a white tail, this is something associated with older bald eagles. So they have to get to be about 5 years old before they have that coloration of their feathers. So earlier, they're more brown, although the feathers can start to then have a mottled appearance with some white in it. And so therefore, it is possible to confuse bald eagles with golden eagles. So here you see some birds which are in the process of maturing. So they can be completely dark brown. Then as they start to approach 5 years in age, they can have white in various parts of their body. So here's an immature bald eagle. There's a mature which had just taken off. Here, if you look, this bald eagle has white on its head, but still some brown. So once again, this coloration is comes in over time, and I believe here once again. So here is a bald eagle, but an immature. So notice that it lacks the white, which is more prominent later. Bald eagles reuse the same nest year after year. And so sometimes one of the funny things is the nest can become so heavy that they can actually break the trees that they're in because of their weight. Here you can see a bald eagle in flight. Bald eagles, when they fly, they don't have that bend in their wing that ospreys have. And notice that the wings are held straight as opposed to, say, in a V shape, which is more typical of vultures. And so if you're trying to identify them, once again, a V-shaped wing, that's a vulture, but then nothing has as strong a straight a wing as the eagles in large birds. So hawks would have straight wings, but they're smaller. So here you can see two eagles together, and as I said, they have made an amazing comeback in our area because of conservation, the banning of pesticides, the protection offered by the Endangered Species Act. So this is a true lesson in how we can positively impact wildlife. So there isn't a biological distinction between hawks and eagles. An eagle is just essentially a big hawk. And one of the reasons I say that is that so fishing eagles, like the bald eagle, are more closely related to certain hawks, while other eagles, like the golden eagle, which is an occasional migrant through our area, would be related to other hawks. And so eagles don't form a biological group more closely related to each other than to hawks. That different groups of hawks throughout time have just gotten bigger to the point where we can call them eagles. The red-tailed hawk is the most common hawk in our area. And if you drive along roadsides, whether it be in trees or along power lines, you can often find red-tailed hawks watching for rodents. They'll fly to the ground when they see rodents perhaps disturbed by traffic as they go by. And so red-tailed hawks, let me just go back to the tail. When they're a little older, they have that prominent orangish pigment in their tail feathers, which is really notable if they're in flight. So if there's a red-tailed hawk above you and the sunlight is shining, then this red color is very obvious. Notice that the adults have a darker brown eye. Well, at the end of this video, I point out that the juveniles, in addition to lacking the red tail, they can have more of a yellowish eye color. Slightly smaller than the red-tailed hawk is the red-shouldered hawk. So they would lack the red tail, and they have stripes on their tail that the red-tailed hawks lack. Also notice instead of having a white patch on their chest, they have brown feathers which go vertically, and they are a little bit smaller than red-tailed hawks. So these are red-shouldered hawks. Smaller still is another hawk called the broad-winged hawk. And so you can find different species of hawk in the same area. And because they have different sizes, then one could, they can coexist. Notice the stripe having a big white stripe on the broad-winged hawk. They can specialize in different prey items and therefore not necessarily be, in direct competition with each other, and thus capable of coexisting in an area. And so this is a broad-winged hawk. Now, certain hawks, when they fly, their tail forms a fan. And so therefore, when you look above you and it's a fan-shaped tail, it's what's called, that's a buteo hawk. And so red tails, red shoulders, and broad wings would be buteo hawks. Here's another buteo hawk, the rough-legged hawk. But this one is only found in our area in winter because during summer, it hunts north of us. And so that's, important for bird watching. If you want to get to know local biodiversity, you just don't go out looking at biodiversity in the summer months because birds have different, migratory schedules, and some will only be found in winter, like the rough-legged hawk. Rough-legged hawks can hover, which is unusual for hawks. So when you see a bird hovering like that, it's called the rough-legged hawk because it has feathers going down much of its leg, more so than most hawks. And so, there are different hawks which will be in our area depending on the time of year. If you're near water, another hawk that you might find is a harrier hawk, which like to hunt for rodents and other small animals, say over marshes and the like. The big white spot on the rump makes it obvious, but you can see, it's just gliding over, say a marsh, looking for movement of, small animals that it would feed on. Now, when one sees a hawk flying overhead, if the tail does not look like fan-shaped, if instead it looks narrow, then this is a different type of hawk, an Occipital hawk. And the Occipital hawks, they have varied food items, but they specialize a little bit more on birds. And so the term chicken hawk was originally, best used for hawks like the Cooper's hawk. Here, there's a smaller cousin, the sharp-shinned hawk, and then a larger cousin, the goshawk. And so it notice has a long, straight tail as opposed to the more fan-shaped tail of buteos. Falcons are included in birds of prey, but they're not as closely related to hawks and eagles. They're in, their own separate family. There are a number of falcons which one can see in our area, especially passing through. So this is a merlin, and one can observe merlins in the Northeast United States, but they don't reside here year-round. So you'd be more likely to see them in their migratory route. This merlin here is feeding on, I believe, a rodent that it had captured. Falcons are such fast flyers, however, that in addition to feeding on rodents and the like, they can also feed on birds. They're better able to catch birds. But there's obviously variation here. They can eat a variety of things. And part of this is dependent on their size. So kestrels are common falcons in our area, but they're small. Especially the males. So in raptors in general, the females are larger than the males. And so a male falcon, a male kestrel is really about the size of a blue jay. And so therefore much of its diet is actually on insects. Falcons can also hover. And so notice, this falcon is capable of staying in one place. That's something that most birds and most birds of prey don't do. And so if you're trying to identify birds, little cues like that, can can help you. The largest falcon in our area is the Peregrine Falcon, which is also the fastest bird in the world. As it stoops, as it drops down on its prey, it can pass 200 miles per hour and is very good at preying on birds, which it can capture from above. Now, I've been, saying, this species of bird, that species of bird. It should be pointed out that when we speak of species, that it is possible for some species to interbreed. So this next bird, this is a hybrid between a peregrine falcon and a gerfalcon. Just like dogs and wolves are capable of interbreeding, or buffalo and cattle can actually interbreed and form catalo, or ligers can be hybrids between lions and tigers. Sometimes, even though we separate something into different species, it is possible that there are hybrids between the two different species. Now, the term vulture applies to different birds. The vultures of the Old World are not related to the vultures of the New World. The vultures of the New World are related to condors, and interestingly, a group of fossil birds, the teratorns, some of which could get to wingspans of more than 20 feet. So the largest flying birds ever, just as the condor is the largest flying bird alive today. The two vultures which live in our area, the most common one being the turkey vulture, which has a reddish head. Vulture heads tend to not have feathers because they're sticking their heads into carrion much of the day. So while these do feed on animals, they tend not to kill. So the only animal that might be killed by a vulture would be a dying animal. So they eat meat, but they don't kill. They go after dead animals. When in flight, a turkey's wings are more held in a V-shaped pattern, which would distinguish from an eagle, where it is straight. So that helps you with your field identification. These vultures with the black heads, this is a black vulture. They tended not to occur in our area decades ago, but as climate has changed and the planet has warmed, they have been moving farther and farther north. So black vultures can be found in the Northeast United States in areas where they previously had not been found. Owls are unrelated to the hawks and eagles, etc. But when we refer to birds of prey, we often include the owls. And a lot of the laws which protect birds of prey then apply equally to owls and hawks. So let me mention them here. Owls are especially adapted to prey at night. So their skull is made into a disc, which helps funnel sound, which lets them, hunt even in pitch blackness. So sometimes they can go into snow and come out with a mouse because they could hear the mice underneath the snow with such accuracy that they could capture it. They can also see so well at night because they have rods and not cones, and they have such large eyes that, say, the light of a single candle would be enough light for an owl to hunt in an area the size of several football stadiums. So they have incredible abilities to fly and to see at night, to hear at night, and their feathers are adapted for silent flight. So while a rodent might hear a hawk flying nearby, it would not hear an owl. Some owls come out at dusk, and there are even a few that are active during the day. So here's a short-eared owl that one can see in our area flying at dusk. Others come out only at night. So owls can vary a bit among themselves. Owls can vary greatly in size. And so smaller owls would, so here's a small screech owl. These owls would obviously feed on smaller items, while the large owls, like the great horned owl, would be capable of feeding on larger mammals such as skunks and the like. So, so there are diverse owls. Here's a screech owl. Once again, you would see it obviously coming out in the day, but that's a hole in a tree where it had I spent much of the day. Many owls simply sit in crooks of trees during the day, so they're actually out during the day, but just because they're not flying and because they're brown in color, then they might easily be missed. The largest owl in our area is the great horned owl. It doesn't obviously have horns. These are just tufts of feathers. It doesn't have much of a sense of smell, and as a result, skunks, which here's a young great horned owl that doesn't yet have those tufts. Skunks, which most animals would avoid, are actually hunted by great horned owls. They are the major predators on skunks, which are also nocturnal. So many mammals come out at night to avoid predation, but obviously while hawks wouldn't be preying on nocturnal animals, these owls obviously have adapted to do that. So here's a barred owl, so called because of the horizontal bars and the brown coloration of the feathers. Screech owls are smaller owls that tend to make a sound resembling that of a horse's whinny. And then the next owl is a short-eared owl. So the short-eared owl, like the rough-legged hawk, is of interest because this is where our area is where it spends its winters. And so during the summers is found north of us. So once again, if you were interested in studying the biodiversity of the birds in your area, you might have to then go out at different seasons because certain birds would be only here in the summer, certain ones only during their migrations, but then certain ones in the winter. So winter is actually a good time to see certain types of birds. It's the only time that one would see short-eared owls. Here's a very small owl, the saw-whet owl. And once again, so owls have the great advantage where they can hunt at night. And so thus, nocturnal mammals, nocturnal insects, nocturnal amphibians would be things that they could prey on, but they come in different sizes. So obviously this adapts them to different types of aquatic life. And I'm sorry, I meant to say nocturnal prey in the previous statement. So with raptors behind us, I'd like to point out that there are a number of other birds in our area which are not songbirds, which will be the topic of the next video. So turkeys are capable of flight, but very limited flight. So they could fly to, the branches of a low-hanging tree to avoid a predator like a fox, but they're not going to fly south for winter or anything. So they are very capable of eating vegetative material and can grind stuff in their gizzards. So for example, they can even digest walnuts with their hard outer shells because their gizzard is capable of grinding. And in the same group is another ground bird, the ruffed grouse, which one can see here. Turkeys are known for the displays that males will give of their feathers, but here you see juvenile turkeys after mating season is done. So you don't notice that those displays. And just one more glimpse. So turkeys are rather omnivorous, feeding on a whole host of plant, vegetative material, and even some small insects and the like. Here you can see males which are making calls and displays during mating season. Now, Just as there are introduced species of plants and fungi and fish, and sometimes there are environmental consequences of that, the same thing would apply to birds. So for example, pheasants are not originally native to our area, but because they were popular for eating and for hunting, they were introduced. And so you can find pheasants in our area, but once again, this is an introduced species, not native originally to our area. Another group of birds which are not songbirds are the kingfishers. They have elongated beaks, and they fly over bodies of water or sit in trees near water. And when they see a fish, then they can dive into the water and then come out with a fish. One can also often find them, hovering as they look for fish. So you can see the very prominent beaks on this kingfisher here. Hummingbirds are not songbirds. They are the smallest birds, and they also have the highest metabolisms, the highest heart rates. And so just the physiology of hummingbirds is simply amazing, the amount of energy that they need to go through. They have a very long beak and a very long tongue. And like woodpeckers, their tongues can be so long that they actually come in the mouth and then actually circle around the skull, perhaps even ending at the eye, so that then that can then be sent out of their beaks. Now, while throughout the world there are many species of hummingbird, and in Paraguay, as I had shown videos earlier, there's certainly a great diversity of hummingbirds. There's only one hummingbird east of the Mississippi River, the ruby-throated hummingbird, so named because males have a red patch on their throat. So we have this one hummingbird species. If one is going to keep a feeder for hummingbirds, one has to change the food frequently. Otherwise, it starts to ferment and build up alcohol, so that it can disorient the hummingbirds because they are so small and light. And now, obviously, ingesting alcohol will affect the ability to fly. And here, there's a male with a red patch in its throat. Now, hummingbirds can capture flies in flight and get nitrogen and nutrients this way. But they also are good at pollinating flowers. And many flowers invite hummingbirds by being tube-shaped, so that it's hard for something like a bee to get the nectar. Only something with its long, thin beak, like a hummingbird, would be able to pollinate that flower. So here we see Cardinal Flower, which is a tubular flower, and a hummingbird is pollinating it. And also, bees don't perceive the color red. So a tubular flower, that is a flower adapted for pollination from butterflies and hummingbirds, as Cardinal Flower is. Nighthawks are not, they are not songbirds, and so these tend to be most visible at dusk, as they fly around feeding on the flying insects like mosquitoes, which are available at that point. Woodpeckers are a fascinating group of birds. They have adapted their bodies, like from their feet to their tail feathers, which allow them to hold a position on a tree trunk, to their skulls, which allow them to slam their skulls into hard wood enough to make a hole. So that certainly requires adaptations. And once again, they have a tongue which is so long that actually not only does it fit in the bill, it actually can wrap around their skulls and end at their eyes. So thus, if they make holes in wood and then they can stick in this tongue, which can have barbs at the tip, or coat itself in a mucus, this helps them grab insects which will be burrowing inside of a tree. And so this not only lets them feed on insects in summer, but also during winter, because insects are in our area throughout the winter. Some of them are, hibernating or, in a larval stage or as eggs, but there are active insects in the middle of dead wood. So the birds which feed on insects, say that fly, they have to fly south for the winter because they can't find food here in the winter. Just have hundreds of ants inside them. Another thing that the ability to make holes in wood allows is it allows to make nests. Now, birds have to be careful with nests because obviously there are a number of things that prey on nests. So, I mean, anything from chipmunks, which can climb in trees, to black rat snakes, which can climb in trees, can go after eggs. And then, I mean, even woodpeckers can feed on young birds. And so even, birds can feed on nests of birds. And so if they have the ability to make new holes, then this provides new clean nests, while other birds may be reusing nests or making nests which are open to the elements and open to predators. Here's a protected nest that's new, and the predators in the area might not have had the chance to learn where the nest is. Very often both males and females have roles in feeding the young as they return to the nest here. And so that was just a little introduction into woodpeckers. Woodpeckers in our area, there are a number of different species. Here you see a species of woodpecker known as the red-bellied woodpecker. It's obviously actually not a great name. It's got red on its head, but there is a woodpecker that has a completely red head called the red-headed woodpecker. You may have noticed that those first two images, one had more red than another. That's because there's a gender difference. The males have more red on their head than others. So here you can see these woodpeckers as they go in and feed the young. And if you watch these videos, you'll notice it's both the female that has brown at the tip, which is going in, and then also, as that was the female, and then here's the male that had a completely red tip. So both the male and the female were feeding the young there. Downy woodpeckers are smaller, and there are two woodpeckers which are very similar in their appearance. They're black and white bodies with a red head, red spot on the back of their heads. The smaller of the two is the downy woodpecker. The larger of the two is the hairy woodpecker. And once again, these can remain in our area throughout the winter. And so if one puts out, food or suet at bird feeders, one can continue to get, there you see a downy woodpecker drumming. So it's not trying to get food at that moment. It's advertising its territory or seeking mates, etc. Hairy woodpeckers are very similar in coloration to downy woodpeckers, but they are a little bit larger in size. Pileated woodpeckers are the largest woodpeckers in our area, and one of the largest woodpeckers in the world. Their size had been surpassed by the imperial woodpecker and the ivory-billed woodpecker, but since both are probably extinct, then the pileated woodpecker is one of the largest woodpeckers in the world and the largest one in our area. And so here you see images of this. Flickers are woodpeckers, but they have adapted more for feeding on ants, and therefore spend less time in trees and more on the ground. One can even find flickers in areas that have no trees, such as the Pampas of Argentina, where they would be feeding primarily on ants. And so one can find a variety of woodpeckers in an area, including the variety of woodpeckers in the Northeast United States. And one of the reasons is that They have different ecological niches specializing in different types of prey. In the same vein, yellow-bellied sapsuckers can not only feed on insects, but they can also, oh, and there at the bottom, you could see the yellow shaft on the tail feathers. There are different races of flicker. There's a red-shafted and a yellow-shafted flicker. Here you can see the yellow-bellied sapsucker, and notice all of the little holes in the trunk of the tree, because in addition to feeding on insects, it can make these small holes that then cause sap to leak out of the tree, and they get their sugar that way. And so yellow-bellied sapsuckers, can have a very distinctive coloration pattern. Obviously, this can hurt the tree, as can woodpeckers in general. So when woodpeckers make a hole in the tree, and now it may already be a diseased tree with insects inside, but now once that woodpecker hole is there, this is an opportunity for insects to go inside. And so the action of woodpeckers can then make trees less healthy, which then encourages more insect infestation, which then attracts more woodpeckers. And so this can then lead to a cycle, which is bad for the tree. So obviously that ring of holes for sap to come out is certainly not good for the tree. One final bird I'd like to mention is the swift. Swifts are actually, their name of their order is the apodiforms, because their feet are small and because they're tucked in, they aren't seen. And so the name apodiforms literally means without feet. They can be seen flying, as you can see here, and they're called chimney swifts because they often can roost in man-made edifices, chimneys and the like. And they can spend most of their lives flying. And so they probably spend more time in flight than any other bird, these swifts. So this has been kind of a review of birds which are not kind of aquatic birds, but which are not the songbirds. So they're non-passeriform birds, kind of a survey of the diversity which can be found in the northeastern United States, such as Orange County, New York.